Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Shots from the Winchester podcast, coming to you right here from the Winchester at Greencastle. Today we have on an awesome guest, longtime friend of mine, and an author who's making the touring circuit. You've seen him on Jocko. You've seen him all over YouTube. Ben Milligan, author of By Water, Beneath the Walls. What they have said is the quintessential history of the SEAL teams. The interesting thing about it, as you'll hear from the podcast today, is it's not really a story about the history of the SEAL teams. It's a story about the Army, the Marines, the Navy, how each one of them dipped a toe in and out of maritime special operations, forming what ultimately became today's SEAL teams. But it's really a story about all of the services, and it's a legacy story about military history. We're really excited to have Ben on today. He's going to talk not just about the book, but about the story behind the book, how those characters came to life, how Ben spent hours and thousands of hours poring over documents down at the National Archives, visiting with people who didn't even know that their grandfather was a war hero. It's a really cool story. It really gives you an insight behind the scenes of the book. Stick around. You're going to like this one.
This individuality stuff is a bunch of crap.
There's a reason why.
A master of innovation.
The key to this growing is you.
Any rational person would give up.
I can't disagree with that.
Make sure that we're not prisoners of our own experiences.
You need a team of great people.
Will not tolerate a loser.
What they need is a common vision.
Helping organizations win one veteran at a time. This is the Greencastle podcast.
This is a different way to start the podcast, but let's just go with where we're going.
Do you want to welcome? Do you want to do anything like
that?
No.
You're not going to official.
Okay.
Am I asking the questions, or are you asking the questions? Who's asking the question here?
This is your deal.
Yeah. You're clearly yeah. Do you have? Let's start on a deeper level. Do you have do you have problems with authority?
I'm normally hooked up to something.
There's so many places I can go. All right. Well, since this is Shots from the Winchester, we are going to start with a shot in the Winchester. You selected Sailor Jerry. We got a miniature, like slightly between a handle and an aircraft bottle here. And because you are an adept researcher, I asked you to do the research on Sailor Jerry. What can you tell us while I'm pouring?
What brief information I found was that it looked like it's it was a rum.
You really did your research here.
By a tattoo artist in either Chicago or Hawaii, two places that couldn't be more different.
But it has a tremendous.
From the brief 30 seconds that you gave me, it looked like it was. It came. So he was a tattoo artist around the time of World War II. Did a lot of tattoos for sailors, Navy guys, and it seems appropriate considering the subject that we're about to talk about, a Navy rum, to talk about a Navy book.
Seems appropriate. All right, here we go. Cheers, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. It's not too bad.
What does it say? It's 92 proof.
Yeah. Sorry, Sailor Jerry. I know I'm not doing justice for your brand, but
all right.
Yeah, it's a good way to start the interview. So what do you want to talk about?
I have half a bottle of this. I'll talk about anything.
Yeah. That's usually how this thing goes. We usually start with an agenda and then just go off the rails at very quickly. Any of our listener will know that we fall off the rails pretty quickly. So
I can see why.
Yeah, you didn't pick up on my joke, listener singular. Well, it doesn't matter. There's gonna be a lot of those jokes that just kind of go. Anyway, dude, thanks for coming on, man. So our people probably don't know, but you and I we've been best buddies for 15 years.
It's 2003, I want to say.
Yeah. You know where you may not remember, I was doing reserve duty at the team, and we were out on that ship, and I remember there was like some
on the James River.
That's right. It's on the James River. There was some sort of ship that we did VBSS on.
Yep.
And And damn if I can't remember what you said. You said something funny when you were going through, and I was like playing your Op 4 as your bad guy, and you came in on me and as the bad guy, and you said something hilarious. Instead of like put your hands down or put your hands up, it was just something off the wall, and I was like, did we just become best friends?
Yep.
And
so 2003, almost 20 years.
Almost 20 years.
20
yeah.
years of jokes.
Yeah. 10 years of which have been in pursuit of this book.
Yeah.
That's crazy, right?
It's crazy.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason I actually wanted to have you on is everybody's got a story, right? And I was in an Uber one time, and a guy said to me, he goes, "What's your story?" And I was like, do we have beef? I don't know. Are we going to get out and fight? I just thought what my story is. I'm just trying to get from the airport to my house. He's like, "No, man, everybody's got a story." And I was like, "Oh, well, one, your tone, it's all wrong, first of all." But no, I said, I was like, "Wow, that's an interesting way to ask." So I just started telling my story. And since then, I've been fascinated by people's stories. In particular, the story behind the story. And that's when I first texted you and said, "Hey, man, I'd love to have you on." The book is fascinating. What you did and what you guys talked about on Jocko's podcast and what you've done in other speeches. In 48 hours from now, you'll be given another speech in front of 5,000 people down at the Navy SEAL Museum as part of their big annual muster. But for me, just knowing you and having been with you through this journey and just, having been a friend following this journey, I'm really fascinated by some of the story behind the story. We were having lunch just not even an hour ago, and you said, you don't just... What was your exact quote? I think I even wrote it down. Like you just said, you said nonfiction history writing is not an easy thing to casually walk into. What does that mean? Because I think is that a good place? I think that's a good place to start to talk about where you came with this.
Nobody, you might one day decide that you want to write a novel, and really all you have to do is just sit down and start writing. Whatever you write is probably going to be garbage. But you just keep writing until, it's something that you can tolerate.
You heard it here first, kids. There's just squashing all your dreams, all you aspiring writers. What you write is going to be garbage.
If you're going to sit down, or if you have the idea that you're going to write nonfiction narrative history, there's a fair amount of research that you got to do beforehand. You got to see what's been done. Already, if you have an idea on the topic that you'd like to write about, and you got to see what's out there. I mean, the existing literature. The next thing you got to do is you've got to learn. I mean, you have to have a significant amount of depth of knowledge before you even start to drill down in your research until you get like a specific idea. And then if you want to do something like this well, you've got to you've got to get to the original source material. And so the only way to do that is by doing interviews or going to archives. I mean, it's not something you just, like I said, casually one day wake up and say, I'm going to go do this. There's a fair amount of planning that has to go into it, or at least there's a lot of steps that you go through before you write your first paragraph.
Is that because you came from the SEAL teams, and so you're writing about the SEAL teams, but I having known you for almost 20 years, I know that you take pride in your work. Is that a reflection of the fact that you do take such pride, or could somebody?
No.
In order to be a good history writer, you have to really invest to yourself. I mean, that seems like almost a given, but
yeah, anybody who writes, it's hard to write a book. It's hard to write a bad book. It's exceptionally hard to write a book that's one, good, and two, interesting to a wide set of readers. There's a lot of people out there who write history, and they write for a dozen other people, and those are usually called professors. If you want to write to a much larger audience, you've got to bring a lot of different skills to bear. I mean, you've got to be one, you got a good researcher, two, you got to be a good writer. I mean, you can't unless you're telling a really just captivating story. You have to be able to draw a reader along sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, and interesting them along the way. Your sentences have to be good. Your paragraphs have to be meaningful, and they've got to support, the chapter that you're writing about. Well, and each chapter has to support, a larger, the objective of the book. So it's
there's
not
a science behind it.
There's I suppose.
Right? I suppose so. It's as much art as it is science, though. Right?
Absolutely. I don't.
Where let me reverse that statement. I think a lot of people think, maybe as you're saying this, I'm thinking people think it's the art of writing. I'm passionate about this subject, so I can just write about it. And if you don't apply the science, and the science being, are you constantly questioning what's the intent of this sentence? Does it support the paragraph? Does the paragraph support the chapter? Does the chapter support the overall goal of the book? If you're not applying the science, then is that how you end up with garbage in, garbage out?
There's lots of ways you end up with garbage, but I suppose that's one way. I think a lot of people they fail in the very beginning because they don't set an objective. If you, one of the first things that I did, and this was intuitive, I didn't get any advice. I just sort of sensed that I had to do this. Was I set an endpoint before I started determining what my beginning was going to be. I figured. Every history that I'd ever read about Naval Special Warfare, the SEAL teams, or any other special operations unit for that matter, it had just been a series of things that had happened. And eventually the writer had taken it up to a point where either their interest stopped or they caught up to present day. That's the problem with history. History continues going. It never stops. So it's hard to find an endpoint if you want to talk about, an institution. So for me, I thought there were a couple of things that I could do to help myself, help keep myself sane. One was to establish an endpoint. I'm going to take the narrative up to this spot, and then I'm going to stop. Everything that comes after, it's out of my purview. The other thing that helped keep me sort of sane and on this path was by coming up with sort of a thesis. I never thought that I would write a book with a thesis or an argument, but I did find that if I did use a thesis or if I had a thesis, it would keep me on a path, and it would give me justification to bring all these other different stories into the book that I would not have had the ability to bring in because they would have been, outside the realm of a comprehensive history of NSW. And I never wanted to write a history of NSW. I wanted to tell
that's Naval Special Warfare for anybody tuning in.
Right. I wanted to tell a much larger story about American special operations in general. The way I sort of describe it now is I wanted to treat the SEAL teams almost like a character in a biography, and whether you're talking about Alexander Hamilton or George Washington, every good biography that's ever been written really is just an excuse to bring in all these other things that are happening, around that central character into the book. I mean, it's a biography is just a history, but sort of told upside down. You're using one character as a vehicle to tell a much bigger story. So that's what I wanted to do with this. I wanted to treat Naval Special Warfare as the central character. But how did Naval Special Warfare get from, scout swimmers in World War II all the way to go anywhere, capture, kill commandos? And I knew the reason, by doing a significant amount of research before I actually started writing, I knew that the reason that it happened was because all these other units, whether they were Marine Corps units, Army units, they had all contributed to that transformation. And so I thought, I set my endpoint in Vietnam. I have this thesis to drive me, and it's going to give me all these excuses to talk about all these different units and all these really, fascinating characters along the way.
For those that are tuning in, I want you to rewind this about 2 minutes and listen to the last 2 minutes of things that Ben said, because within that, what you said is so much. There's so much to what it took to write the book. You talked about you have to do research, right? You have to find the characters. You have to have a thesis. And having followed your journey a little bit, I know a little bit about, but again, I don't know if I know all the story. One of the things that I wrote down, and I want to talk about a bunch of those things, but when you talk about doing the research, so you had done about 2 years worth of research before you even proposed to Random House, like, hey, I'd like to write a book about this,
yes,
and got them to support and say, okay, we'll ultimately publish it. But and then the next 8 years spent writing it and refining it and polishing and putting the finishing touches on, while working a day job, raising 3 boys and all of the other things that come with it. You were still in the reserves, I think, at the early part of that, and so much going on. But what I wrote, and this is where I think the story behind the story is just fascinating. So, you spent, these are just things I took from listening to you on other podcasts and knowing what you went through and knowing, having followed your story, but also pieces that are written in the book, that when I've heard you talk about it, I go, geez, I had no idea like that. This one paragraph was a product of maybe dozens or even 100 hours worth of research and pulling on some threads and going down some rabbit holes to find out that that's not germane to the story that you're trying to tell. And what I wrote down was, you spent hours and hours standing and bending over a table, taking photographs of documents at the National Archives, read through in one instance 750 pages about just one character in the book. And that's something I don't think it dawned on me until I put myself in your shoes. At the National Archives, where you sourced a lot of this material, you don't Xerox it and just give it to the librarian and say, hey, can you copy this for me, right? There's restrictions on it, and you're actually taking photographs and then trying to read that photograph on your iPad or something at some point and try and find relevance in there.
Yeah, my process and my research method changed for every chapter in the book, in part because every chapter sort of just presented its own challenges. When you start a book in World War II and you end in Vietnam, naturally the characters that you're writing about in World War II aren't going to be alive anymore. So you really have to spend a lot more time on the collection of letters, original documents. Most of those documents are, contained in, various archives. And then when you get to Vietnam, a lot of the characters that you're writing about are still alive. So you have an opportunity when you get to that point that you never had when you were researching the stuff in World War II. The nice thing about researching material in World War II is there's been so much interest, so many people have done, the work on that the archives are relatively organized. A lot of them are digitized. So when I wrote my first draft of chapter 1, I didn't have to go anywhere. I wrote the entire chapter from my basement. And it was all because, most of the, there'd been so much published about the raiders on Macon Island. I had a lot of primary source material, a lot of newspaper articles that I was able to find online. And there were, after action reports that I was able to pull from various World War II archive websites. So it was, I thought, boy, this is going to be not a cinch, but at least I'll know where all my, I'll know the resources that I need to go to find stuff. When I got out of that first chapter, I realized nobody had done any work on any of the other things that I was going to write about, and I found myself like
what, like the lulls between the major wars?
No, I mean, so chapter 1 is about the Marine Corps raiders, which a significant amount of work had been done on, so material was readily available. But when I got to this, my chapter on the Army, Navy, Scouts, and Raiders, like nobody had done any work on this. So I had to go and dig all this stuff out. I had to find it. So
there's one point where you say, and I think this is relevant. I want to talk about what you were talking about there, but there's one point, and it might have been the Jocko interview or another one where you talked about that you had, in several instances, you had unearthed. You'd found in your research in the National Archives the actual physical document that somebody had handwritten an AAR on in World War II or post World War II, and this was their typed or handwritten AAR, their personal notes, something that if it was written in 1940, and this is 2021, I mean, it hadn't been seen in 80 plus years.
In some instances, yeah. I mean, sometimes you're digging into rabbit holes where nobody's touched this material,
and nobody has laid eyes on it since it was filed away. Maybe somebody has, but there was points where you said that this nobody even knew this existed, and somebody said we found this in an old dusty file lost somewhere in the annals of history. And
I mean, The archive system in this country is fantastic. I mean, they have an abundance of material. They have to turn material away now. I mean, people are ransacking their closets now and finding letters from their grandparents and their parents, and they don't want this stuff to just
be lost.
So they're the National Archives is getting truckloads of material every day. I mean, no, but there's an abundance of material. And I think there's going to be. Anyway, go ahead. Next question. Sorry.
Is that it? I feel like I'm being interrogated.
No.
Next question.
Sorry, no.
I'm kidding.
I lost the bubble on it.
No, and that was just the first piece. I look in the course of writing this, and again, we talk about the research, and that's why I think the story behind the book is so fascinating. You submitted your request to have documents released to you that were otherwise not released yet. I don't know through FOIA.
So there's the standard military classification time frame is the maximum is 25 years.
Right.
Once a document has been or once the date of a document has 25 years have passed, then that document is generally declassified. There's extenuating circumstances, but 25 years is the generally the time frame that you can expect if you're trying to get access to classified material. But that doesn't mean that the document itself is declassified.
Right.
So in the instance where it hasn't been declassified, you normally do have to put it in a FOIA request, which the first time I did it, it was you don't know what to expect. You don't know how long it's going to take for the National Archives to come back to you, and you kind of are treading water while that happens. I mean, you're doing your best to work on other stuff, but at the same time, that you can't really move on until you get this one clue.
And I think that's what I'm getting at, is that you initiated although it had reached its declassification date, it still takes somebody saying, I want to have access to this. Yeah. Who does not have the security requirement, but
the one neat thing about that is when you do come across a document that hasn't been declassified, well, this is totally new material. Nobody's dug this up before.
Nobody's ever used this in a book before, and which is again, I think is just
it's exciting. I mean you get I've often had the question, what inspired you to write a book? And I don't think I was ever inspired to write a book. I was inspired at various, points in the writing of the book to keep going. And those moments where you find something that no one has, touched or, since it was put into the archive, I mean, that's sort of an intoxicating moment. Not intoxicating, that's not the right word, but it's a moment where you're like, this is neat.
I think intoxicating is probably a good word for it, because it's momentous, right? And if you appreciate the rarity of it,
it also depends what's in it.
Yeah.
When you talk about this,
you can hear the sad trombone sometimes. You open them, you're like, that's been classified for 70 years.
Yeah, and it happens all the time. Yeah. I mean, you open up the treasure chest and there's nothing in it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there's a couple coins at the bottom of it. It's disappointing, but. When like you mentioned the 750-page one, I mean that was cool. That was neat.
And to dig in, I want to come back to that one, but I wrote appealed to the CIA to release unclassified documents, attempted to have classified documents redacted, tracked down, and met with the kids of some key figures in the book to get an understanding of who the person was and their backstory and what made them tick. In one instance, this was the one that just kind of blew me away, right? And again, there's so much behind what we just said about like just trying to get through the FOIA request to get stuff redacted, and trying to just or be the first person to expose it to see that since it was classified and. But this is the part that really just kind of blew me away. In addition to tracking down and meeting with some of the kids and the grandkids of some key figures in our history. In one instance regarding, I think it was Harley Burke in the Bay of Pigs. Did I get the name right?
Arleigh Burke. Yeah.
Arleigh Burke, right? Of course. Arleigh Burke, never heard of him. Never see you have any significance in naval history?
I don't know. Do people know Arleigh Burke? I assume
only because of the Arleigh Burke class ships. That's why I know his name.
Yeah, you're right. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully, yeah. Anyway,
Hopefully no more now, right?
Yeah.
But you couldn't get classified accounts of the Navy's commando activities, so you tracked down the Cuban frogmen who actually accompanied the U.S. Navy, and you interviewed them.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. So I never stopped research on the book, or I never actually stopped writing the book.
Yeah.
The publisher just eventually took it away from me. One of the things that, so each of the chapters presented difficult challenges, and each chapter was hard to write in its own right. But the one chapter that I continued to work on until literally the publisher demanded the book so they could produce it was chapter 9, which was my chapter about Arleigh Burke, the Bay of Pigs invasion, and the UDT trained Cuban frogmen that conducted the raid on the beaches. And when I wrote the first draft of the book, the first draft didn't include any of the first person accounts of the Cuban frogmen, and I had intentionally not dug into that aspect because getting material from the CIA is a black hole, and I didn't like writing about any event that happened just from a secondary source. Now, other stuff had been written about the Cuban frogmen at the Bay of Pigs, but it was all a secondary sourced material, and I wasn't comfortable writing about that unless I had actually found documents or interviewed any of these people myself. So I intentionally didn't go into it, but when the publisher came back and they were like, "This is a good chapter, but where's the meat? Where's the battle stuff?" It's like damn it. So it initiated an entirely new 3-month period of additional research, and I tracked them down and I found them and interviewed them and got more material, and it was,
Tracked them down and found them just in 60 seconds. That's
60 seconds. It took
no. I'm not saying. I'm saying in 60 seconds. Take us through, because I tracked them down and found them. Seems like it is so such a better story behind. I tracked down these guys who conducted these operations 60, 70 years ago.
Yeah, I've tracking down folks now. You need a White Pages account and a Facebook account. You can find most people that way. As long as you have a name, an address, or not an address, but a general town that they lived in, in a couple of hours of research, you can usually find most people. Now, whether or not they'll talk to you, that's a different, question altogether. I was every person I called, and every person in the book. Every person that's an actual character in the book, I tried to talk to as many people as I could about them: kids, relatives, friends, and
even when you found the individual themselves.
Oh yeah, yes, absolutely. Tried to get as many different perspectives about a person as possible, because when you're talking to a person who's actually lived through it, just like you and I, we all have blind spots.
Yeah,
we don't know. Try to describe yourself to somebody. You're
awesome,
incredibly good looking.
Yes.
You've never done anything wrong. You've won every argument that you've ever been in.
Are you talking about me or you?
Both of us.
Yes.
That's how we all see ourselves. We're the heroes in our own
It
stories.
is. I feel like I'm looking in a mirror.
But you in order to get a full picture of somebody, you have to talk to the people that know them. So you gotta find them.
And you found these guys, and
yes,
or at least some.
Yeah, every person that I wrote about, I've talked to numerous people that either knew them know that full stop. Yes,
and that's actually a good part. One of my notes as I was reading the book is that, and I wrote this down as sort of like just a fascinating. There's 2 parts of the book that I didn't know. I'd seen, you'd let me see a couple chapters as they were in development, but I don't think I realized it until, probably you let me see chapter 7 or 8, that this isn't a book about by water beneath the SEALs, the rise of the Navy SEALs is almost misleading. And what I mean by that is it's a book about how the SEALs came to be, as you just mentioned, about all of these characters and how their influence on that time period and the institutions and how the institutions eventually formed it. But it really isn't even about the SEAL teams. The SEAL teams are sort of the end product of the Army, the Marines, and the CIA constantly dipping a toe into this amphibious maritime special operations unit, but never fully getting there. And big Navy, throughout a period of decades, right, ultimately, finally grabbing hold of this, but not without having dipped a toe in several times, and Arleigh Burke and some of the other characters you talk about, Tunney, right? But it's really a book about the Army, the Marines, and the CIA. And I think at one point you even said you had thought about the title for the book being the unit that never should have been, or something to that effect. Is that right?
Yeah, the original subtitle for it, and it's a terrible subtitle, but it was By Water Beneath the Walls, the origin story of the Navy SEALs, a unit that should not exist. The clunkiest title in history. I mean, the title is already long in and of itself, and then the subtitle. It would have been like the print would have been
onto the inside cover.
Yeah. No. Yes, it's not a book.
It's like the title of Borat, makings for glorious something of Kazakhstan. Oh my God, you almost wrote your book like Borat. That's essentially what I took from that.
Well, the thing is, I had such a hard time coming up with the title. I felt like I'd done such a lift to get there. I felt like, the least the publisher could do was give me an assist with the subtitle. I mean, I'd written the whole book. Just give me a hand here. But
so what is By Water Beneath the Walls? It is mentioned in the book, but I wanted you to talk about it.
That comes from the opening sequence. It's the opening epigram of the book, which is so I want to come back to the other question, but this. Yeah. So I had a really hard time with this title. The original title for the book was, The Evolution, and the evolution was meant to describe, this the transformation that the SEAL teams had undergone.
Sure.
From, like I said, from scout swimmers to go anywhere, capture, kill commandos. I never liked the evolution for a couple of reasons, but I needed a placeholder when I sent it over to the publisher for to get the contract. But the evolution to me implied that this was sort of a haphazard process, that it was inevitable, like evolution is, that it was like Darwin's origin of the species. It was all about survival of the fittest, and implying that the seals had evolved because they had been successful, where other species had not been. I didn't like that. I thought that was that's not what the story was. The story was sorry.
You good?
The real story was that this was that this was a very decisive evolution that happened. I don't even like using the word evolution to describe it. It was a decisive transformation. It wasn't one person at any one time that said we're going to have, or at least not in World War II, that said we're going to have a Navy unit that can go anywhere and do capture, kill, commando raids. That's not what happened. The Navy was just solving problems, but they were solving them decisively. And in each instance, the Navy was solving a problem that one of its sister services had decided that they didn't want to solve, or that they had solved it and they didn't want to solve it anymore.
So give us an example.
Probably very early on in the book. So chapter 1, you have the creation of the Marine Corps Raiders. So the Marine Corps before World War II is the Navy's utility force. The Marine Corps belongs to the Navy. It's a department of the Navy. So if the Navy had wanted its own commando force, the Navy was going to turn to its subordinate service, which was the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps would have, performed all the missions that the Navy wanted it to perform. But in World War I, the Marine Corps is detached from the Navy and is sent ashore to fight on the Western Front, and it becomes it essentially grows to become a parallel army, sort of a rival to the U.S. Army. it becomes so professional, so good, so much of a challenge to the Army that the Army wants to absorb it after the First World War, and the Marine Corps wants to become its own service. So fast forward to the beginning of World War II, the Marine Corps has all of those ambitions. They're attached to the Navy, but the Marine Corps wants to become this, sort of parallel army, sort of an amphibious version of the U.S. Army.
And anytime you say that the institution wants to do it, what you're talking about is really the
yes, institution's a euphemism for the planners of that institution.
The visionaries.
Institutions don't have brains. Right. Institutions are collections of people.
Right. It's not an organic being in and of itself, but the visionaries within the organizations see opportunity, and they're going, why? Or they see threats to their existence, or if the Army sees that the Marine Corps being a threat, well, let's just absorb them, or vice versa. Right.
So in World War II starts, Pearl Harbor happens, the fleet has taken a kick in the teeth, and nobody wants vengeance faster than one, President Roosevelt, and two, Admiral King. So between the two of them, they have this idea to start effecting a sort of lightning raid throughout the Pacific. So who do they turn to? They turn to the U.S. Marines. They ask the Marines to create commandos that can go raid anywhere in the Pacific. The Marine Corps is totally preoccupied with becoming this parallel army, like I said. They don't really want to create commandos. But they do because, they, for a couple of reasons, but they ultimately create their own version of commandos, which is the Marine Corps Raiders. Their heart's never in it, and for one reason or another, they put in charge of, one of their first raids, this guy, Evans Carlson, who nobody else in the Marine Corps really likes, but he's got political connections that they feel like they have to put him in charge of this. So they do. The raid, as you'll read in the book, is a disaster. The Marine Corps essentially says, well, we told you so. And the Navy says, well, I guess it was sort of a failure, so we won't go to the Marine Corps for commando-type raids anymore. But the Navy never loses that interest for them. So the impulse for these commando-type raids operations, the Navy retains, whereas the Marine Corps continues evolving or transforming into a different organization. So that happens consistently, time and time again. The whole book is just this process where someone at some point will identify this need for commando operations. Normally, the Army, the Marine Corps will fulfill that role for a short amount of time, and then the regular Army or Marine Corps planners will commit that unit to action, often to disastrous results, and the reaction is always to just close up shop, disband the unit. But oftentimes, in that development, it left the Navy sort of holding the bag operationally, and the Navy would just, if the Army or the Marine Corps, or if the Army or Marine Corps partner was not going to continue forward with that mission, then the Navy would just sort of push into the gap. And it happened time and time again.
What's interesting, I think, that stands out to me is that the Special Operations Command today, the U.S. Special Operations Command, SOCOM has what they publish as their, I believe, 3 truths, right? They call Special Operations Forces or soft truths. One of those being that, and I'm paraphrasing what the exact soft truth is, but the Special Operations truth, one of them is that Special Operations Forces can't be manufactured in a time of need. We need to be preparing and training them at all times so that when a 9/11 hits, we can be in Afghanistan within days, and that 9/11 doesn't hit, and then we say, oh gosh, if only we had a force that could go into the mountains of Afghanistan and seek justice against our enemies. And it sounds like in the early part of the 19th or the 20th century, or in the middle part of the 20th century, we hadn't learned that lesson. They constantly disbanded these commando units and then stood them up when the need arose. Is that right?
It is right. But that's, the entire U.S. military was doing that constantly up until World War II. Finally, in World War II, they not that there wasn't a retraction, a massive retraction after World War II, but the idea, we had this cultural understanding of what the U.S. military was prior to World War II, and we didn't want a standing army. We never did. We always considered that sort of a lurking threat to democracy. So after every war, the U.S. Army would sort of shrink back to this core of professional soldiers, from which, if there's another massive war, you would just build out around. And that happened pretty much with everything. And I assumed that the reason that there were all these disbandments of all these various units were because of that sort of tendency to downsize after every major conflict. That was not the case. Like you said, I mean, each of these units had its own disbandment story. The Raiders had their own disbandment story, the Army Rangers, and some of these things are they're brutal. I mean, just the very, incredibly tragic. And you
in what way? What does that mean?
Well, you hate to see, all of this effort put into these units. I mean, these units that were created, the men quite literally fought and died for each other. And they, created these units, created these legacies, and then Army or Marine Corps planners, in the wake of their failure, would often blame the guys that they sent on these impossible missions for their own failures, and then they would disband them. They just ripped the rug right out from under them. And it's not that the planners were stupid. I mean, there's a lot of, people are, furious with military planners right now with what's happened in Afghanistan. I don't think any of these people are stupid. They're just, at least in the instance of these units, the service chiefs, the planners, whatever euphemism you want to use for them, their priorities were just different. They're, like I said in the example of the Raiders, the Marine Corps' focus was not on commando type raids. The Marine Corps' focus was on total surrender of the Japanese, and the only way you're going to get total surrender of the Japanese was by dominating these islands, and you weren't going to dominate these islands with commandos.
No, not with a 12-man unit. That's where you're talking 1,000-man organizations to take the entire beach. I got you. That's actually a good segue into the fact that this book, although I just said a second ago, and we talked about it, that it's about the Marine Corps, the Army, and the CIA, it's really not about them, because it's the Marine Corps is an organization. It doesn't make its own inherent decisions. It's a few. This book is really about, and I think you've said this on a couple different interviews, it's really about a few key individuals who made decisions, had a vision, were able to to influence the right people, were able to get their vision seen. And we know in any organization, whether it's corporate or military or whatever it is, that there's always competing visions for, well, we should be doing this, we should be doing that, we should be going after clean energy, we should be still looking for fossil fuels. There's always competing priorities, and ultimately some vision wins out in some form or fashion. And it seems like with these things, a lot of times it was just an individual who was either very influential, charismatic, had maybe a little bit of luck with success on a battlefield where they validated this particular need or validated this capability. Even if it got scrubbed later, it would go log into the annals of history, where we would go, hey, remember that thing we did in World War II that was really successful? How do we stand that back up? Is it really a book about just individuals who did those kind of things?
Yes. There's always a person who's most responsible for everything. And in the writing of the book, my like I said in the beginning, my first objective was to identify the end point. And then it was to identify a start point. And from there, it was to find all the episodes along the way that connected the two. So for me, the episodes that would connect these 2 points would be either a operation that was representative of something that was happening or a consequential turning point. And in each, whether it's a mission that I was talking about, or a new policy, or in the chapter on the Buckley Report, there was always one person who was pivotal in either the success or the failure of an operation, or the success or failure of a new organization or a report or something like that. So my challenge was, one, find the episode or find the moment where history turns or pushes us or drives us toward that endpoint that answers our question. And then once you find, that operation, who's the most important person in that operation for either for either driving the continuity of the organization or for having the organization disbanded. So, and once I sort of had that formula, it was almost not an easy process, because I still had to find the event, but at least I knew organizationally how I needed to conduct my research. One, find the battle.
Mm-hmm.
That once that's done, then you find the reason that the unit was either kept around or killed. And then once you have that, then
killed meaning politically, like it was disbanded.
And not just not always. I mean, in the case of the Rangers in 1940 or in Cisterna in 1944, they were quite literally killed.
Yeah.
Still the biggest special operations disaster in our entire history.
Yeah.
2 entire battalions of Rangers were killed or captured, marched through Rome, and put in German prisoner of war camps. But in each of those instances, there's one person who's responsible, or there's one person who's most responsible for a unit's success, failure, or its continuity or disbandment.
You say that as if it's
it's not a comfortable thing to.
And that's where I'm going with it.
It makes me uncomfortable.
But you say that there's one person. I guess that leads me to ask the question: how hard was it? Because in any the people who are successful stood on the shoulders of giants. Eventually somebody or multiple people contributed. How hard was it, or am I over exaggerating? How hard is it to find one person who was most influential for that, or did it stand out?
That's not hard, because the one thing that a historian or somebody who's looking at something like in the way a historian does,
mm-hmm.
Versus like an economist or a political scientist. Like a political scientist, economist, sociologist, they're always asking why type questions. Mm-hmm. They always want to know why something happened. Like they're identifying the dependent variable and the independent variables, and they're trying to see what independent variable was the most important for changing, the one organism that we're trying to figure out. Always asking that why question, and they're sort of just going backwards trying to figure that out. Whereas if you're a historian, really you're just putting things in order. So why is less important than what. So what happened? Once you put things in order, though, the interesting thing that sort of happens is the why questions just sort of bubble up. Like you just start to notice who's the most important person for something happening, and it just sort of rises to the surface. But that doesn't alleviate the extra burden then of you having to make a significant judgment about this person that you're writing about, somebody that you might have developed a close relationship with. I mean, there are lots of people that I wrote about who I really, really liked. I mean, I felt like I knew them in some ways better than their family members knew them. I was reading their mail.
Where you're cheering them on as you research it,
Absolutely.
But you ultimately have to tell the truth, which is that they were a royal fuck up and they were the reason that the unit got disbanded or something like that.
Yeah. So you have to, and in a lot of instances, who am I to make judgments about, this person, whether it's, Colonel Darby or Carlson or Bucklew or whatever. You are having to weigh in on their life and
the decisions they made, right?
The decisions they made. And you have to, who am I? Almost every single character that I wrote critically about has done more for this country than I will ever do. But that doesn't, mean that I should, let them off the hook, or maybe that's not the right way to say it, but it doesn't mean that I should, give them a softball or give them a pass or something like that. It's my job to look at them critically, to assess, the job that they did, and then present to the reader whether this person was a success or failure. That's not an easy thing to do, but you have to do it.
Do you? We talk in this podcast. We do a lot of discussions about leadership and in everything we talk about. Was there a common thread? And it's sort of a challenging question of the people who were successful. You talked about people that were successful in very politically charged, very trying times, very times of turbulent change and again competing priorities and agendas. Was there, if you had to find a couple common threads about the people who ultimately were successful over the course of what is really radically different periods of time in U.S. history, is there something that stands out amongst the Bucklews and the Tunneys and the Burkes and those people?
I think I probably have more common threads, or at least things that I noticed or similarities between the folks that failed than I do with the folks.
There's still leadership lessons there, aren't there?
Absolutely, there are. But I mean, as far as the one thing that I noticed about successful leaders is that they there's no one set of traits that make a successful leader. You can have a successful leader from any walk of life with any sort of personality makeup. Anybody can succeed at it in their own way. I would say that if there was one thing that I noticed about successful leaders is that they all tended to work really, really hard. And really, they were all very focused on details. We don't like leaders who are micromanagers, and I think there's a difference between a micromanager and somebody who's detail oriented. Yeah. Because somebody who's detail oriented, they're not just an idea person. They're not just thinking. They're not just coming up with ideas and telling somebody to execute. They're thinking through the logistics of that. How does that look on the ground? We might come up with ideas, but if you can't articulate how that idea is going to be put into place, then what good are you? You're just an idea guy throwing crap against the wall, hoping it sticks. As far as the
thread of failures.
The thread of failure of the unsuccessful leaders.
Let me ask a different question. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to totally changing directions a little bit. You talked about learning and reading these these folks' mail and being involved, getting to know them intimately, just through their writing, through the what's written about them in history, and feeling like this emotional connection with them. Was there one person that stood out? And I actually have a guy that I'll tell you when I was reading. There was one guy that I'll tell you about, and then I'll ask you the question. Is damned if I can't remember his name. It's not Tummelson. Not confuse it with John Tummelson. It was the individual who got captured and
Watson.
What was it?
Watson or McGee?
No, it's Watson. I was going to say it was something S-O-N at the end. Watson, who was captured and then came back, and in the meantime, and just couldn't catch a break. And he was one of those guys that
Oh no, that's McGee. So McGee is captured.
Is that the one whose brother goes on to become a war hero while he is captured, and he endures unimaginable. He wasn't he in Bataan Death March, that kind of thing.
Yeah. He wasn't in the Bataan Death March, but he was
in a Japanese camp.
So John McGee.
Was it McGee?
He's captured in 1942,
and all he wants to do is be a war hero, right? Or just be
he just wants to be relevant.
He just wants to fight, right?
Yeah, he wants what every fighting man does in 1942. He wants to be relevant. He wants to, and I think that's something we can all identify with. We want to be relevant,
and he is broken and battered and beaten, and
he gets he's put in a Japanese prisoner of war camp for 2 years. Kept
2 years.
2 years, forced starvation, all the rest. He finally manages to escape, and it's a incredible escape. And he in the entire time he's been planning this escape, he's been simultaneously planning on building a guerrilla army to take on the Japanese.
I remember you saying, you said this, yeah.
I mean, he's a guy that, you can't help but like him. I mean, you can't help but, respect, not only the ability to survive in those circumstances, but think beyond that and motivate himself to escape and then
For
build this
2
organization.
years, he's enduring awful captivity at the hands of the Japanese and still planning his revenge this whole time.
Planning his revenge. And then when he does finally escape and he makes it back to a friendly area, and he is, to create this guerrilla army that he's been planning in his head for 2 years, he finds that this guerrilla organization already exists, and they don't want they want nothing to do with him. This is terribly depressing. And so he gets a ship home, and as soon as he gets back home to the United States, I think he spends 2 days with his wife and daughter, who he's never met, and he immediately volunteers to go back because he can't stomach the thought of missing the war, participating in the war.
There's an element where you have to respect a guy who's
absolutely.
But there's also, today we would call that, like, you were 2 years in an awful POW camp, and like, do you have any PTSD? No, I'm good. I want to go back.
Yep.
Okay, let's send you back. Thank God we've come farther, right?
And the whole time that he's been, a captive, his younger brother has become a legendary, behind the lines commando leader in Burma. And all he wants to do is just, live up to the standard, lead troops in combat. And he makes it over to Okinawa to take command of his first unit. And the war ends.
Just can't catch a break. So you're right. I was not Watson. It was McGee. You read that and you kept cheering for him, right? You're like, oh my God! All he wanted to do, God bless such men that such men live and want to they're just driven to be warriors, and he can't catch a break, can't catch an opportunity to do it. So that's the question then: was there, or who were the characters that you really got connected with, and why?
I got connected to all of them. I'm not going to say I liked all of them. I mean, I liked, but I tried to be, one, objective about them. Mm-hmm. You can like somebody, you can dislike somebody, and you can still write about them. You just have to try to be objective. It's not that you don't have a bias. Everybody's going to have a bias when they're writing. And part of the reason that I stopped the book in Vietnam was because I didn't want to get any further, into periods that intersected with my own service, because then I didn't think I could be totally unbiased about something. I would try to be objective, but you just can't. But when you're writing about people, you at least need to try to be objective about them, their contribution, their strengths, their weaknesses. And I never let myself have a favorite character or anything like that, but I did you do find yourself in the case of Watson, somebody like that, I mean, I can't imagine a person more unlike me. I mean, here's a guy who probably never read a book, and he's, just one of the greatest fighters that we produced in World War II and the Korean War, and he just can't help but like the guy. I mean, I think he was arrested something like 76 times.
Oh yeah, that's
between
right.
his World War II service and his Korean War service, everything from drunkenness to fighting with cops. I mean, he's an incomparable person, and even knowing the backstory to a lot of these folks, you're trying to be somewhat generous with their legacy, and you've got to. You want to be somewhat protective. Some of them didn't have, particularly rosy, backstories after they, the period that I cover. I tried not to dogpile on anybody. I tried not to even if somebody was a failure or something like that, I tried to be, relatively generous in the way that I portrayed them, at least show mitigating factors and why they acted the way they acted, or why they chose to do what they ultimately picked. So.
For those that were successful or not successful, you had mentioned, and you even write at the end of the book that you met and interviewed so many kids and grandkids of of our World War II and Korean War vets, and that they had absolutely no idea that their grandpa, that Gramps, just the guy who liked to read the Sunday morning paper or whatever, who liked to, go play softball with him, who was just grandpa to them, that they had no idea that he was crucial and that he was so momentous in influencing American history. Yeah. Was that kind of a cool point to be the one to like share that? And
there's nothing. Yeah, being able to,
like to just tell them what their legacy is without it. They didn't know. They didn't know they were.
I mean, that's something I always wanted to do. Even if I knew that I was going to be critical about somebody's contribution or something like that, I wanted to keep the family involved as much as possible, and then represent things that I found back to them. So, and it didn't happen in every instance, but you'd collect so much material about somebody, stuff that they had written, and you want to once you're done with the material, I mean, it's like the ladder that you use, to build something. Once the thing is built, you don't need the ladder anymore. So, you've got all this material.
That's a weird analogy. Do you get rid of your ladders when you're done?
No, I don't get rid of my ladder. But
yeah. You're right. Is there like a pile of ladders outside your house? Everyone's like, this guy's an idiot. He doesn't know he's going to paint his house again someday.
Gosh. Right. But you get the
Ben Milligan, this place of disposable ladders, everybody. The guy at Home Depot was like, dude, we're making a fortune off this guy. Idiot comes in and buys a step stool at least twice a week. I got the bowl down from the top shelf, and then I threw it out, and I threw out the step stool, not realizing I have to put the bowl back up there once I was done with it. Sorry, did we get off here? Yes.
No, you got at least two more in you.
Yeah. I can do this.
All day.
I can do this all day.
What else? So I don't know what I was saying. Well, once the material is done, I have no problem with anybody, looking at the material that I've used to base my assessments off of. I mean, it's everything that I have, it's all public record. I mean, that's the one thing that I think makes what I've done different than what a novelist does. I mean, I'm not an artist. I'm not a novelist. I'm an arranger. That's all. That the art is in the arrangement. Yeah. Like you're just taking existing material, whether it's memory or documents, and you're trying to put it together into a narrative and tell a story.
You say in the book on let's see here. It is on page. Let's see here. What is the page number? I'll edit this out to make it look like I had it teed up.
There was a deer that just walked behind you. Big.
They are. They are big ones back there. I don't know. This is my first time ever even picking up this book, so I don't know. It didn't have it only had like 10 pictures in it, so I don't know. I don't know where's man, this thing's long.
This isn't going to air, right?
This podcast?
Yeah, it's just for you and me, right?
Oh no, yeah, this isn't going anywhere. No, well, listen, our 5 listeners are like, they've already tuned out. I'm gonna start this piece over when I go. Oh, there was this thing. What the fuck is it? I noticed on when you were like, "Geez, Jocko, you have all these markers in the book," and I was gonna just start putting like Post-it notes all over the book. I do have the book. The version I read at home actually does have like 2 bookmarks in it, but I wanted to one up Jocko since he could tear me up like a tissue. I wanted to one up him on one thing. And here it is on page 510. Over the years, other readers have, whether they knew it or not, also added their shoulders to propping up these pages, including John Kleck.
Full stop.
That's the only time my name is mentioned in the book. And it's on... So there are 511 pages, and I'm on. My name's on page 510. Do you feel like I didn't get?
Some would say you had too much of a role in the book. Arguably, like I could have cut down your character significantly.
Do you feel like you shortchanged me on my influence on American history? Do you feel like I should have been at least on in the 400s, on page 499 or something?
I think you should be happy with what you got. I think that's sufficient.
Do you think you should have used my picture on the cover?
In fact, now that we're talking about it, and if the second edition does come out, you're getting perilously close to getting expunged.
Just change my name to like Johann Clark. People are like, who the hell is that guy? What do you want people to know about the book? That's a loaded question, isn't it?
Yeah, I want people to know that this was, that this wasn't an accident. That this institution that we, as a country, we owe a lot to. I think SEAL teams have had a rough couple of years in the media. We've had a lot of what I probably just call over publicization, like we were too much in the public eye, and I think the public is justifiably interested in the organization, and I think that it can account for 98% of the books that are out there. Publishers don't print books about other units because people aren't interested in other units. I hate to say it, and I wish that they were. And part of the objective of this book was sort of to set the record straight in a way, to say that the SEAL teams aren't, or SEAL history isn't just SEAL history. SEAL history is...
it's almost not SEAL history at all, isn't it?
It's a lens.
It's an amalgamation of Marine Corps and Army and CIA and national defense history.
It's by trying to understand why the SEAL teams came into existence, you're going to get a much bigger picture than you anticipate. You're going to get a picture of why all of these units exist, why or how their legacies funneled into this one, and then how this one helped these other units that were recreated become what they are today. It's not the history of one unit. It's a history of lots of units and how they continue to work together. Which, if that diminishes, the luster of the SEAL teams, in exchange for bolstering the reputations and image of other units, so be it. I think it's worth it. So that's why.
There was the last thing I want to ask you about is, and you and I both, we've been cracking jokes at each other for almost 20 years, but something that comes out in the book, and I don't know if it's as obvious to everybody who's not in naval special warfare, is some of the tongue-in-cheek comments, and I mentioned that to you at lunch earlier, that there are pieces where, and one of the things I wrote down is, and it's funny, I when I read it, I picked up on it, and then I heard you with maybe on the Jocko podcast that where you talked about, it said, I think it's Tunney is quoted as saying something about, and I'm paraphrasing, that the ragtag look of some of the initial prospects led him to believe that they were unfit to be elite warriors. And it goes on to say that, you went on to say that, as a Marine, he believed that looking sharp and maintaining like high morals was a necessity to be an elite warrior. But you said something in the book, and I wish I had the direct quote, or something devoid of, or something they're not inclined.
So Tunney's belief was that a strong physique underpinned a strong character.
Yes.
And I said, sailors weren't Marines and had never cared a whit for either physique or character.
Yeah, physique or character. Which is if you don't know, if you're reading for history, it's so sly, the comment, that you might breeze over it and miss the humor there. And I think what jumped out at me about that is that the SEAL teams today. There was such a foreshadowing in that statement of what the SEAL teams would become today, which is this group that, you and I have both worked overseas. We both worked in Iraq with Marines, and they're very good at what they do, and God bless the Marines, and they are also very adherent to very strict dress code standards and uniform standards and things like that. Whereas we are literally the opposite, where we give a lot more autonomy to the individual, and as opposed to looking for uniformity amongst the unit. We give a lot more autonomy in terms of independent thought and free will, and everything from weapon choice to how you operate and how you carry yourself. Did you see, and because that's such a hallmark of the SEAL teams today, I think it's what makes us effective, that we have, we tread in some gray areas of what would be considered military discipline or strict military code. But I think it's what makes us effective. It allows us to be creative, innovative, ingenuitive, is because it's not, we don't go back to the field manual to consult on what the solution is. We're given a lot more leeway to create a solution, to find that solution. Did you see that along the way throughout was that one of the things that continued?
Yeah, you notice cultural.
The culture, I guess that's what I'm talking about.
You notice notice the differences, and and I, as far as cracking jokes at the expense of other services, or even expenses at the Navy. I remember the first time I was writing, and I was keeping my writing at a pretty high level. I was almost professorial when I was doing my first draft, and I remember thinking I remember writing about Red Mike Edson, and for whatever reason, as I was writing about it, I said something to the effect that he was a perfect Marine, and then it just popped in my head, as he wasn't effective, or he wasn't an effective commando leader because as a perfect Marine, he'd never used his imagination unless ordered to do so, which I stopped and I laughed, and then I deleted it. And I was like, I can't put that in there. And I thought, why can't I? It's my book. I can do whatever the hell I want. This is,
Marines can't read anyway, so that's your,
and
there you go, guys.
I think I thought the people that are going to get hung up about something like that, they're not reading this. You're absolutely right. They're not gonna read the book. So why not? I mean, so I didn't take that as license to pack jokes on every page. But I think you need to, when you're going to write a book that's 500 pages, you need to help your reader along with whatever you got, and whether it's an interesting detail. Or just an artful phrase, but also let the reader know you're kind of in this together. I mean, you always want to. I didn't write this for me. This isn't a diary. That's what you want to do. Then you go write, in your journal. I wrote this for you and my mom and every other team guy that I've ever worked with, and everybody else. I mean, this is not. Like I said, it's not SEAL history. This is American history. I wrote it for my fellow Americans, and I want them to, get to the end of it. And I felt like the only way that they're going to get to the end of it is if they have reasons to, if they are continually engaged, and if they have a laugh along the way, all the better.
What's next for you? It only took you 10 years to get this one done. What's next?
I don't know yet. I'm reading a lot, but I feel like I'm in a bit of a wilderness. I haven't every good idea that I've had so far is at least another 10-year project, and I'm not sure I have the courage to take that.
That's some impressive perseverance and stamina, my friend, to stay with it for 10 years.
10 years, yeah. I mean, it would take at least another year to put a proposal together, but I haven't even settled on an idea yet. So I'm not putting any pressure on myself. I've got plenty to keep myself busy. I'm probably just going to keep reading for a while. I've set an ambitious reading schedule for the year. I'm gonna, wait until I finish the year and see what I've read and see if there's anything that I liked and anything I'd like to explore more, and then maybe take 2022 to start refining like where I go.
Takes us back full circle to how we started it, right? You don't just what was the quote, right? Nonfiction history writing is not an easy thing to casually walk into. You have to find.
I've had people tell me I should try fiction, and I'm not sure that would be any better. I think the one advantage that you have if you're going to write nonfiction or nonfiction narrative history is at least you have note cards. You have research to help you, kind of direct you. It's a bit of a flashlight for you in the dark when you're trying to figure out where the hell you're going. If you're a novelist, you don't have anything. It's all in your head. You've got to get there with no aids. I'm not sure I would be more comfortable with that. I think I'm okay in this genre.
Yeah, it's probably another conversation for another time, but it is kind of fascinating when you're trying to come up with something. You're like, where did the Ewoks live? Oh yeah, on the forest moons of Endor.
I don't have
Let's
that.
just throw some shit together. And
I don't have that. Yeah.
Yeah, at least you can't be wrong.
Fair point.
Actually, I was talking to somebody one time, and I said something like the photon torpedoes, and they were like, well, technically, photons don't come in the way the gamma ray works. And so I ended up beating them up, and I was like, shut up, nerd. No, but they were like, that's not the way that laser is. Technically should have been called gamma ray torpedoes. And I was like, oh, dude, I'm never going to watch Star Trek again without seeing your nerd face on there correcting me. Well, the way it technically works, shut up. Anyway, well, where can folks find you on the interweb?
I've got a Twitter handle, Ben H. Milligan, and I'm on Instagram, bmilligan3. Look for a Facebook maybe in the near future. I got to figure out what my password is. Trying to think if there's anything else.
There's Chinese hackers all over the place right now. They're like, oh, I'll get that for him. Don't worry. I'll post all kinds of stuff for you, Ben.
But you're not going to be impressed. Don't waste your time.
Any big speaking gigs? I mean, obviously.
I'll be speaking. Let's see. I'll be speaking at the UDT SEAL Museum in 2 days. So that is
after this thing will have come out.
Yeah. So yeah.
So if you can get in your time machine and go back, you will see them. Fort Pierce.
Yeah, right. But aside from that, no. I don't. I'm not. I'm not a speaker per se. But if asked to come speak at the UDT SEAL Museum, I'm not sure you can turn that one down. So,
but given the content of the book.
Given the content of the book and and as near and dear to my heart as the organization is, I'm happy to go. So,
did we talk about the title? That's the last thing I think we had said. Like,
oh yeah, the title.
Yeah, tell me about the By Water Beneath the Walls.
Yeah, so the title is like I said before, I didn't like the title The Evolution. I didn't think it really spoke to the book.
Just to be clear, the title was going to be just The Evolution, as in 2 words.
The Evolution, and it was meant to talk about the transformation, from scout swimmers to go anywhere commandos. But evolution to me is just a haphazard process. It's not decisive or anything like that. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this was, none of this happened by accident. This was a decisive process, all along the way. It wasn't like a Navy person in World War II wanted to create commando raiders, but they were constantly trying to solve problems, and each one of those problems was solved by a different person. So there was nothing haphazard or accidental about this history. And the more I thought about it, when I got to the end of the book, and I had this sort of writer's block with the title. I really did not know what I was going to call this book, and I was panicking about it, and I was trying everything I could to come up with an idea. And every good title that I had either been taken,
or was like 19 words long.
Yeah, or it was just bad. I thought it was good. I would send it to a friend, and they'd be like, "That's garbage." I sent you text. This is a terrible title. I finally came up with this. I finally just sat down and I asked myself a couple of questions. I said, what at its core is this book? And the answer that I came back with was, this is an underdog story. It's a story that never should have happened. And to me, I just kept thinking like, well, what are some really good underdog stories in history? And I couldn't get out of my head this idea of like crusaders sneaking into a castle using an aqueduct, like breaking into it. So I went back. My grandfather, one of the last books that I gave my grandfather was this book on Byzantine history, and I went back through it and I was looking for any episodes where there was an aqueduct used, and I found this story about Justinian II, who was a deposed Byzantine emperor who he led a small group of raiders across the Black Sea to the shores of Constantinople. He snuck into Constantinople through an aqueduct and captured the city. And it was I couldn't think of a more of a cooler story, but one that had happened in that way. And it was a victory essentially won by water beneath the walls. And the title just kind of clicked in my head immediately. And I sat on it. It was probably the one title that I had that I was able to sit on long enough where I didn't, tell anybody about it for, 20 minutes. And after 2 days, I was like, I think this is it. I sent it off to my agent, Jim Hornfisher, and his response was, sounds a little too much like Wind Beneath My Wings. They're like, damn it, this is the title. This is the title of the book. So, and one of the last texts that Jim sent me before he died was, I've come around on the title. I think it's a great title. But I've still had lots of people that will text me, periodically. Love the book, hate the title.
Well, with friends like that, what would you do? Yeah,
Right.
With enemies like that, what would you do?
Right.
All right, cool. Well, thanks, buddy. Thanks for joining us, man.
For having me on. It's a lot of fun.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Green Castle Podcast. Please be sure to give us a like, a thumbs up, a share. You can find us at greencastleconsulting.com/podcast or on all the major podcast channels and the social media channels, including our YouTube channel. Thanks very much. We'll see you on the next episode.